We're doing God's salvation story. We've been talking about that for the past month and a half. And now we're moving on to our next step. We're looking at entering into God's promises. So we're still with the children of Israel, and we're just going to follow the story that we did last week, just so we can get an idea of what's going on. Remember that the Bible is God's salvation story of God's plan to bring humans back into his presence. And that's what we've been seeing. Each story in the Bible is a step toward returning to God's presence. And at the center of the story, we got to remember, is God's promise that one day Eve's seed is going to crush Satan's head. That's what we're looking for, is that freedom from slavery. Last week we saw how God punished all of Israel by killing every firstborn son of every household. And we saw that he protected those households which were covered by the blood of the Lamb. And remember that an Egyptian could do this, apparently, a Hebrew could do it, and it wasn't how good the child was, or how godly the child was, or how much the child prayed. It was only whether or not the blood of the Lamb was protecting the house. And we saw that the Hebrews left Egypt, and that God defeated Pharaoh's armies at the Red Sea and destroyed Pharaoh's army. So we talked about the fact that when the Hebrews entered into the Red Sea, they were slaves. But when they came out, they were free because their slave masters were dead. And we talked about how God's presence was with them. And now we're going to see that God led them through his presence to Mount Sinai, where Moses first saw the burning bush. That was 48 days after they left Egypt. So just keeping it in mind how long it took from the time that they left Egypt until this time, 48 days to bring them to Mount Sinai. When they got to Mount Sinai, Moses went up in the mountain to meet with God for a short while. He came down, he told Israel to get ready to meet with God. 3 days later, God spoke to the people in a powerful, thunderous trumpet voice that terrified everybody with thunder and lightning, and everybody was frightened. He spoke the 10 Commandments, and the people said they would do them. And it's really important because the people said, all that the Lord has commanded, we will do. And God made a covenant with them. A covenant's a contract. And God makes this contract with Israel. He says, now, if you will listen to me and carefully keep my covenant, remember, covenant is a contract, you will be my possession. Although all the earth is mine, and you will be my kingdom of priests and my holy nation. These are the words that you are to say to the Israelites. Moses went up on the mountain to meet with God for 40 days, and God gave him the laws and told him many things. And God wrote the 10 Commandments on stones. So what happened was that the Israelites just were like us. Because Moses is on the mountain, he's with God for 40 days, the people decided he was probably dead, and they asked Aaron to make an idol. And this is when it gets sad. When the people saw that Moses delayed in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us a god who will go before us, because this Moses, the man who brought us up from Egypt, the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him." Then Aaron replied to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives and your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me." So when Moses came down from the mountain and saw them worshiping an idol, he broke the 10 Commandments in anger. Because of this sin, God threatened to destroy the Hebrews. The Lord also said to Moses, "I have seen this people, and they are indeed a stiff-necked people. Now, leave me alone, so that my anger can burn against them, and I can destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." Now here's where Moses shines. This is what just shows us what an amazing person Moses is. His love. So Moses interceded with the Lord, his God. "Lord, Why does your anger burn against your people you brought out of the land of Egypt with a great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, he brought them out with an evil intent to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth? Turn from your great anger and relent concerning this disaster planned for your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. You swore to them by your very self and declared, I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of the sky, and will give your offspring all this land that I have promised, and they will inherit it forever. So the Lord relented from the disaster he had said he was going to bring on his people. Moses is awesome. I mean, he's doing this to a people that constantly is torturing him. These people are constantly complaining, and they threaten Moses, and they yell at Moses, and yet Moses begs God to protect them. So God forgave them. They stayed at Mount Sinai for almost a year, 11 months, while the people built the tent of meeting and its furnishings. You see, English Bibles often call it the tabernacle, and that's fine. It's a tent of meeting is what it is. It's where God met with Israel. So they're building this tent of meeting. You can see it there. This tent of meeting here is the holy place, and then behind the holy place back here is the most holy place, the Holy of Holies. And you notice it's got curtains because if anybody goes into that most holy place, they die because they're seeing the presence of God. And so the tent of meeting actually protected Israel from God's holiness because God's holiness is so pure. So when the tent of meeting was finished, God's glory came down on it with so much power that no one can enter. You see that glory there, and this glory is over the most holy place because that's where God's power was residing. The very presence of the great I am who I am was with Israel in all of his glory there. And so this is an awesome moment because God's presence has come down on earth. It was there in the burning bush, not before that though. I mean, it was in the Garden of Eden, but we lost that. Then it was there in the burning bush, and then it was there again when the pillar of fire at night and the pillar of cloud by day was guiding them, first across the Red Sea and then through the wilderness to Sinai. But now something different has happened. The power of God, the presence of God, the glory of God has descended down into the tent, and this is going to be God's dwelling place now. And then Solomon's going to build the temple, and that will also be God's dwelling place. But all of this was temporary. God's plan had always been to bring Israel to the land God had promised Abraham. We've got to keep that in our minds because the whole point is to get to the promised land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Go and assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, Yahweh, remember, that's the word that means He is, from I am who I am. Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me and said, I have paid close attention to you and to what has been done to you in Egypt, and I have promised you that I will bring you up from the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, to a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, this is at the very beginning. This is when Moses first meets with God, before Moses goes to talk to Pharaoh, before Moses does the miracles in front of Pharaoh, before God kills the firstborn sons of all the men of all the families in Egypt. This is before all this. The very first time God meets with Moses, what does he say? I will bring you up from the misery of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites. So right away, we have this story that God's going to bring them to the promised land because that's the point. The promise was always to go to the land. After almost a year, Israel was ready to conquer the land God had promised Abraham. The Lord spoke to Moses, send me men to scout out the land of Canaan I am giving to the Israelites. Send one man who is a leader among them from each of their ancestral tribes. So there are 12 tribes, so there are 12 men. And so these 12 men are sent out into Canaan because they are going to investigate to see what the land is like. Moses gives them instructions. When Moses sent them out to scout out the land of Canaan, he told them, go up this way to the Negev and then go up into the hill country. See what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak, few or many. Is the land they live in good or bad? Are the cities they live in encampments or fortifications? Is the land fertile or unproductive? Are there trees in it or not? Be courageous. Bring back some fruit from the land. It was the season for the first ripe grapes. So he gives them the instructions, and the 12 men enter Canaan to find out what kind of land it was and what kind of armies were there. You can see this picture is these two men are overlooking a fortified city with the walls there. It's a fortress, like our fortress in Lahore. So they went up and scouted out the land from the wilderness of Zin as far as Rahab, near the entrance to Hamath. As they went through the Negev, they came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were living. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Now, after 40 days, and remember that number, the 12 spies, not 40, the 12 spies returned to give the report. You can kind of already see how the report's going. Somebody's really tall and somebody's really worried, and they're really scared. They reported to Moses, we went into the land where you sent us. Indeed, it is flowing with milk and honey, and here are some of its fruits. However, people living in the land are strong. The cities are large and fortified. We also saw the descendants of Anak there. Joshua and Caleb were among the 12 spies, and they begged the people not to listen to the other 10 men. And Caleb quieted the people in the presence of Moses and said, we must go up and take possession of the land, because we can certainly conquer it. But the men who had gone up with him responded, we can't go up against the people because they are stronger than we are. You can see them here arguing with Moses and Aaron. So they gave a negative report to the Israelites about the land they had scouted. The land we passed through to explore is one that devours its inhabitants, eats them up. And all the people we saw in it are men of great size. We even saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, come from Nephilim. To ourselves, we seemed like grasshoppers, and we must have seemed the same to them. So now, everything's falling apart. God's led them to the promised land. They can go into the promised land. He promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He promised it to Moses. That's what the whole story was. I'm going to bring you to the promised land. And now they're at the boundaries of the promised land. And what happens? The spies sent are telling the people, don't go. Then the whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites complained about Moses and Aaron, and the whole community told them, if we'd only died in the land of Egypt, or if we'd only died in this wilderness, why is the Lord bringing us into this land to die by the sword? That's a funny thing, because God had just completely defeated, completely destroyed Pharaoh. And now, just 53 days, well, more than 50, no, not 53, 11 months, sorry. 11 months and 14 days afterwards, the people are saying, our wives and our little children will become plunder. Wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? Are you serious? You really want to do that? So they said to one another, let's appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. Are you really serious? You want to go back to Egypt? You want to go back to slavery? You want to go back to people who are beating you? And do you think when you get back to Egypt that the Egyptians are going to say, oh, here, sit in my chair? No, they're going to say, we're going to beat the life out of you people. You killed the firstborn son in our household. I mean, what are they thinking? So they really, really do not want to go into the promised land. Now, there are 4 brave men in this story. We only know about 4. and they disagreed with the other 10 spies. The first two, Moses and Aaron. Then Moses and Aaron fell down with their faces to the ground in front of the whole assembly of the Israelite community. Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were also among those who scattered out the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite community, tearing your clothes is a way to show that you're upset or angry or in grief or in amazement. The land we passed through and explored is an extremely good land. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into this land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and give it to us. Only don't rebel against the Lord, and don't be afraid of the people of the land, for we will devour them. Their protection has been removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. So this is an awesome paragraph. What we just read here, it's an awesome paragraph. So Joshua and Caleb gave them great ways to obey God. And so I want us to think about this and think about this really carefully. We'll come back to it too. They focused first on God's promise. It's an extremely good land, a land flowing with milk and honey. So if God's calling you into something that's difficult, the first thing you need to start with is God's plan, his promise. Secondly, focusing on God's presence. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will bring us into the land. The Lord is with us. So if they had focused on God and said, well, if God's pleased with us, then, I mean, he's leading us here. If he's pleased with us, if we're not being jerks, the question isn't, can we defeat the Canaanites? The question is, are we pleasing God? Because the battle's won if we're pleasing God. If we're pleasing God, then everything's fine. But if we are not pleasing God, it doesn't matter what we have. We can have missiles and nuclear bombs. It won't matter, because if God's not with us, we're doomed. He's the one that brings us into the land. It's not us that brings us into the land. It's God who brings us into the land. And they say, the Lord is with us, so we can do it. And then thirdly, they need to focus on God's plan. We will devour them. That's the plan. I mean, God says it again and again and again. We see it in Numbers. We see it in Exodus, actually. And then we also see it very much so in Deuteronomy, which Deuteronomy happens after this story. But still in Deuteronomy, again and again, God says, you will destroy them. You will defeat them. You will overwhelm them. You will conquer them. So it's not like it's a surprise. This is God's plan. Their protection has been removed from them. It's an amazing thing to go into battle knowing that God has removed your enemy's protection. Whatever they think is going to keep them safe no longer will work. It's just not good enough. And we need to know that in every battle we go into, we have to realize that Jesus has stripped Satan of his power against us. He's transferred us out of the kingdom of Satan into the kingdom of God's love. I mean, he has broken Satan's power over us. And then fourthly, we need to focus on God's purpose. And by that I mean, what does God want us to do? Don't rebel. It's a funny thing. God calls us into ministry, and God calls us to do important things. And we almost take it like it's a volunteer kind of situation. No. Going into the promised land is not a volunteer situation. You got to go. God's commanded you. Only don't rebel against the Lord. Don't rebel. If God's saying do it, then you got to do it. And then finally they say, stop focusing on those people. Don't be afraid of the people of the land. Don't be afraid of them. Don't be afraid of the people. Don't worry about that. If you're thinking about God's promise, it's extremely good land, a land flowing with milk and honey. If you're focusing on God's presence, The Lord is pleased with us. The Lord will bring us into the land. The Lord is with us. If you're focusing on God's plan, we will devour them. Their protection has been taken from them. If you're focused on God's purpose, don't rebel. Then you can face the people, because you know the other four are already true. But if you're only focused on the people and you're not looking at those four focuses, then you're going to have a hard time. But there's a terrible problem. Most of the spies did not trust God's promises, and they persuaded the people to turn back. And here's the trick. They did not like God's plan for giving them the land he had promised to Abraham. And it's all about the plan. The problem is not about the land. They like the land. That's a good thing. The problem is they don't like God's plan, because God's plan was far from pleasant or easy. And that's usually the way it is. God's plan, I am giving you the land. Now, go and conquer all the people and remove them from the land. Wait. You're giving us the land, but we have to conquer it. Yeah, that's it. You got it. You have to fight for it. Wait a minute. I thought you were giving it to us. I'm giving it to you. I've removed their defenses. So go in and do the war. Like, wait, no. If you've already defeated them, if you're taking away their power, then can't we just like walk in and then hand us the keys? So God's gift, it means danger, hardship, fearful enemies, war, battles, consequences. Sort of like, it's a gift, right? I'm giving you the land. So it's sort of like a man giving his wife a diamond ring. He says, sweetheart, I've given you this diamond ring. It's in that box there. You can open it up. But you do want to notice that I put it in a lion's cage, and the only way you're going to get it is by getting past that lion. That's sort of like saying, I've given you the promised land. All you have to do is go in and conquer all the people. Like, but I'm not really thrilled with the way you're giving this gift. And the Israelites are saying, we don't like the plan. We like the gift. We don't like the plan. Now, there's a plan of how the Hebrews are going to take the land, and they don't like this plan. First, God would cause the people of Canaan to be very afraid of the Hebrews. They like that part of the plan. I will cause the people ahead of you to feel terror and throw into confusion all the nations you come to. I'll make all your enemies turn their backs to you and retreat. I like that plan. That's a good plan. Second, God would drive the people of Canaan away. I will send the hornet in front of you, and it will drive the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites away from you. That's a good plan. I like that. Third, God would do this over a long time, so there would be enough Hebrews to fill the land. I will not drive them out ahead of you in a single year. Otherwise, the land would become desolate and wild animals would come against you. That's interesting. So this plan is not the plan that you'd expect at first. He's causing the people to be afraid of them, and he's going to drive them away like having a hornet, which is like a wasp, a bee. But then it's going to take over a long time. It's not going to be in a single year. It's going to be over a long period of time. That's really interesting. God's plan is the Hebrews would take the promised land little by little, and they would have to be done by battle. I will drive them out little by little ahead of you until you have become numerous and take possession of the land. So that's interesting. So it's not going to be a one battle that deals with everybody. It's not going to work that way at all. This is going to be something that's going to be week after week and month after month and year after year, where they're going to have to fight another group of people, and then another group of people, and then another group of people, another town, and then another town, and then another town. And so it's going to take years before all of the people are removed from Canaan. And the Hebrews, they don't plan because it's hard. And they blame Moses and Aaron. So they want to go back to Egypt. They said to one another, let us appoint a leader and go back to Egypt. They don't like the plan that God has. And honestly, most of the time, When God leads us into some deeper way of living our walk with Him, serving Him, we don't like the plan either. We like the result, but we don't like the plan. When God calls us into a hard place, we often act just like the Hebrews. We don't want to suffer to find God's blessings. And they're going to suffer. They're going to be in battle after battle after battle after battle. God calls us to do a ministry and people criticize us and we're like, wait a minute. I don't want to do a ministry if it's no fun. We begin a Bible study and after a few weeks, few people are coming and we're like, wait a minute. No. I only wanted to do a Bible study if it was quote unquote successful. Honestly share our faith at work and somebody complains or worse. We're like, wait a minute. No. I thought you were going to bless this if I share my faith, Lord. What's the deal here? What's going on? God brings us into a difficult situation and we want to go back to a place of peace and rest. This coronavirus thing, it's really strange. It's like something we've never experienced in our lifetimes. And it's affecting the whole world. And countries that are mighty and powerful countries are down on their knees. China, down on its knees. United States, down on its knees. Korea, down on its knees. You're like, what's going on? Japan, down on its knees. You're like, and Europe is tremendously affected by this. You're like, what's going on? And we're saying, God, are you calling us into something here? I don't like this. I want to go back to the way it was last month. I mean, why is it that yesterday everything was fine and today everything's falling apart? I want to go back. God's like, nope, I'm bringing you into a new situation. We serve others and they don't appreciate it or maybe they take advantage of us and we're like, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. I didn't sign up to serve other people and suffer, be discouraged, be humiliated. That's not why I did this. We begin praying for those who do not know Christ. But after a while we stop praying because it gets discouraging. You pray and you pray and you pray, nothing happens, and like, I don't want to do this anymore. It often happens to us. We teach a children's class and find ourselves exhausted by the end of the day. We want to give up, like, I can't do this anymore. It's exhausting. What's the deal with all these children? And so we say, why is it that I want to come to a place of blessing? I want to bless the children, or I want to grow in ministry to others, or I want to serve people. But why is it that it's in so much difficulty? We stop serving because it hurts. Sometimes when God is calling us to overcome a sin, we give up when we find out how much work is involved. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but one of the reasons why that sin that you've had in your life, whether it's gossip or bitterness or unforgiveness or pornography or pride, well, when you have a sin and you know it's there, it just doesn't go away. The reason is because the place of blessing, which is the freedom from that sin and the positive fruit of righteousness, the problem is that blessing is in the middle of a battle. You don't get the blessing without the battle, and battle's no fun. Like you hear a convicting sermon, why don't we change after hearing such a message? Often, after the sermon, we commit our hearts, we say, I want to change. I'm done with this. That's it. I'm done. And then we try to do better and we fail, right? I'm sure you've had this happen, right? You hear a message, you're like, I got to change. This is no good. I got to change. And then you try to change and you fail. And then if you try again, we fail again and we feel really bad. And then too often we just give up. I mean, it's when the battle starts getting nasty, we just give up. We have the promise of the Spirit's fruit, but that means we got to fight the battle that brings us there. You want the fruit, you got to fight the battle. For consider him who endured such hostilities from sinners against himself, so you won't grow weary and lose heart. In struggling against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point in shedding your blood. And what he's talking about is we haven't gone to the extent that Jesus went to. To overcome our sin, Jesus went all the way to the cross and died for us. We haven't fought the battle yet the way Jesus fought the battle. We rarely realize that the place of blessing we want to enter involves a battle we have to learn to fight. So the angry Hebrews did what we often do. They decided it was time to find leaders who would not force them to fight because they don't want the struggle to get the blessing. Blessing of spiritual fruit, the blessing of ministry that's fruitful, the blessing of transformation. They don't want that because that is going to involve pain, and they don't want pain. In fact, they're about ready to kill Moses and Aaron when the whole community threatened to stone them. The glory of the Lord appeared to all the Israelites in the tent of meeting. It's like, ooh, maybe you want to put that rock down. What do you say? So why is it that when God has given us promises of deeper Christian life and maturity, how come we instead want to go back to slavery to sin? We do this all the time. God says, hey, you hear a sermon like, I want to change. And then you go back to where you were before. Why is that? That's what the Hebrews wanted. They really said, okay, make us slaves. If we get to choose between trusting God to lead us into this land of promise that's going to involve battles or being slaves, we'll choose being slaves. And here's where we see again, we already saw it once, we're going to see it again, what a great man of God Moses is. The Lord said to Moses, how long will these people despise me? How long will they not trust in me, despite all the signs I have performed among them? I will strike them with a plague and destroy them. Then I will make you a greater and mightier nation than they are. But Moses replied to the Lord, the Egyptians will hear about it, for by your strength you brought up this people from them. They will tell it to the inhabitants of this land. They have heard that you, Lord, are among those people, how you, Lord, are seen face to face, how your cloud stands over them, and how you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. This guy's really persuasive, isn't he? If you kill his people with a single blow, the nations that have heard of your fame will declare, since the Lord wasn't able to bring this people into the land he swore to give them, he has slaughtered them in the wilderness. He's really persuasive. That is super persuasive. Moses reminds God of who he is and what he has said, and he begs for God's mercy. So now, may my Lord's power be magnified, just as you have spoken. The Lord is slow to anger and rich in faithful love, forgiving wrongdoing and rebellion. But he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing consequences of the father's wrongdoing and the children to the third and fourth generation. Please pardon the wrongdoing of this people in keeping with the greatness of your faithful love, just as you have forgiven them from Egypt until now. I want that guy praying for me. That's just so much love, so much compassion, such amazing prayers. God's punishment. They would not have to invade Canaan, but they could not go back into slavery. They would wander. The Lord responded, I have pardoned them as you requested. Yet, as surely as I live, and as the whole earth is filled with the Lord's glory, none of the men who have seen my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tested me these 10 times and did not obey me, none will ever see the land I swore to give to their fathers. None of those who have despised me will see it. Wow. How long must I endure this evil community that keeps complaining about me? I have heard the Israelites' complaints that they make against me. Tell them, as surely as I live, this is the Lord's declaration, I will do to you exactly as I heard you say. Your corpses will fall in this wilderness, all of you who are registered in the census, the entire number of you 20 years old or more, because you have complained about me. I swear that none of you will enter the land I promised to settle you in, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. I will bring your children, whom you said would become plunder, into the land you rejected. They will enjoy it. But as for you, your corpses will fall in this wilderness. Your children will be shepherds in the wilderness for 40 years and bear the penalty of your acts of unfaithfulness until all your corpses lay scattered in the wilderness. Wow. When Moses reported these words to all the Israelites, the people were overcome with grief. And they did what we often do, like on a regular basis. They got up early the next morning, went to the ridge of the hill country, saying, "Let's go to the place where the Lord promised, for we were wrong." But Moses responded, Why are you going against the Lord's command? It won't succeed. Don't go, because the Lord is not among you, and you will be defeated by your enemies. Now, I just want to explain this because this is a little confusing at first. The people say, well, we were wrong. And then they're going to do what God told them to do, but it's too late. And let me explain this. It's really pretty disturbing. It's called consequences. God can forgive you for a sin, but there are consequences that can't be taken away. A guy commits murder. Well, God can forgive that. Forgave Moses, so he can forgive that. But the deal is, he forgives that, but the person's still dead. You still have to go to jail and maybe be executed for your murder. In other words, just because God forgives you doesn't mean that he takes away the consequences. Sometimes it's not possible. You cut off your arm's gone. It's gone. You live with the consequences of what you do. You can do terrible things. You can raise your children in terrible ways. You can be terrible to your wife, and God can forgive you, and you can repent from that, but you have to live with the consequences. These people had to live with the consequences, and they didn't understand that when God does something like this, we say, all right, I have to live with this. God, would you take it away? God says, no. Okay. All right, fine. So they don't believe that. So what do? They go to battle without God's presence, and they're defeated. They dared to go up to the ridge of the hill country, even though the ark of the Lord's covenant and Moses did not leave the camp. And the Amalekites and the Canaanites who lived in that part of the hill country came down and attacked them and routed them. It means totally defeated them and made them run as far as Hormah. So they got totally creamed, totally destroyed in this battle. And lots of them died. Okay, so as believers, we need to realize that God's promises often require us to enter into battle. Often. In ministry, raising children, right? Raising children, it's a battle. It doesn't just happen. The older your children get, the more of a battle it is. You can say, I don't want to put up with this. I don't want to go through this pain. God's calling you to a place of deeper growth. Prayer. If your prayer life is not a battle, then you're not really praying enough. I mean, there's a lot of work involved in prayer and overcoming sin. You got to battle to overcome sin. Growing in the fruit of the Spirit. You got to battle to grow in the fruit of the Spirit. And learning to love others. You got to battle to learn to love others. And sharing your faith. You got to battle to share your faith. And discipling others. You got to battle to disciple others. In Christian fellowship. We say, oh, well, church is all supposed to be so nice and pleasant and all that. No. Even in fellowship, it's a battle. And God uses these battles to transform us. It's not as if the battle has no meaning. It's not like, oh, I've got to earn this. No, it's not about earning. Because as you battle, you grow. Think if the Israelites had the wisdom, if they'd had the wisdom to fight for the promised land when God commanded them to do it, what would they have learned about God? How could they have known God in a deeper way, seen his work, and seen that when they take steps of faith, God works? Then they pick up the sword and they say, God, I'm so scared. And to go into the battle, how much they would have grown. When we fight the battles that God calls us to, overcoming sin, growing in the fruit of the Spirit, learning to love others, we say, I'm gonna stick this out because God has called me into this battle. And I know that God is with me and God's for me and God's leading me. And we stick in that battle. He transforms us. The battle is a part of the transformation. And not only that, Paul says in Romans 5, but we also rejoice in our afflictions because we know that affliction produces endurance. That's the battle. Endurance produces proven character. You want proven character? You got to endure. You want endurance? You got to have affliction. That's just the way it works. And proven character produces hope. You want hope? Well, you have to go through endurance. You have to have proven character, which comes from endurance, which comes from affliction. And hope does not disappoint us because God's love has been poured out in our hearts through the Holy Spirit who was given us. Far too often, so totally true, Christians hear God's word calling them to fight in battle, but they give up. They don't experience his blessings. They're children instead of grown-ups. Anyone who has to drink milk is still a child. We're talking about spiritual milk, baby food, without any experience in the matter of right and wrong. Solid food and learning to suffer for the sake of Jesus is solid food. On the other hand, is for adults who through practice are able to distinguish between good and evil. As a matter of fact, my brothers and sisters, I could not talk to you as I talk to people who have the Spirit. I had to talk to you as if you're children, as if you belong to this world as children in the Christian faith. He's talking to the Corinthians there because they are so immature. They're like little children. But you have to grow up. How do you grow up in the Christian walk? Well, when God says, go into the land, I'm giving it to you, the land of spiritual fruit or the land of overcoming sin, the land of doing a ministry, whatever it is, go into the land and conquer. You're not earning it, but there's a battle to be fought. When we hear God call us to grow, to serve, to love, what can we do? Well, we can learn from Joshua and Caleb. Focus on God's promise. Learn what God has said about transforming us to be like Christ. Learn what God has said about using us to minister to others. Focus on God's presence. Practice what God says about our position in Christ. Practice what God says about the ministry of the Holy Spirit. Focus on God's plan. What does God want to do? What's he calling us to? Focus on God's purpose. What's his calling on you? What's your mission? What's he doing in your life? And stop focusing on those people, the people that scare you, the people that pressurize you, the people that criticize you. Remember, don't fear man. Remember that God is infinitely more powerful than anyone in this world.